So in this video, we're going to be talking about the core emotions. What are the main core emotions? So as a recap, if you haven't watched video 1 where I break down what our emotions are, please go and rewatch that. But in that video, I mentioned the core emotions. And think of the core emotions like primary colors, which I hope we all learned in school. You know, you have red, you have green, and you have blue. And then those colors are you have red, you have yellow, and you have blue. And those colors are used to create a multitude of other colors like orange and purple and green. So the core emotions are basically the same. These are the emotions that we're all born with, that we all experience, just like we all experience hunger and fatigue. We all experience these core emotions. However, sometimes, depending on the circumstances, these emotions can come together and makes them a little bit more complex. So understanding the core emotions helps us to avoid overwhelm because we can know what their signals are and we can be more familiar with them when we begin to work with them and process them so that we know what they're telling us to do, what they're showing us to do, right? Our emotions are signals and they help us take action. They help us take care of ourselves. So let's go through briefly what they are. The first core emotion I would say is sadness. Sadness is a very normal human emotion, like all the other emotions. And sadness arises when there's a void, when we've lost something, there's a lack of something, and typically something meaningful to us, right? So sadness is connected to that core need of meaning. It's also connected to that core need of connection. And when we're sad, it's because we're lacking this connection in some way. The next core emotion would be shame. And shame can kind of follow along from sadness. If we don't process our sadness or we create a lot of stories around our sadness, it can lead to shame. And shame is a really misunderstood emotion. It's actually one of my favorite emotions to work with because when we know how to work with our shame, it can actually lead us to loving ourselves. Shame is connected to our connection to ourselves. It's connected to our identity. And so when we're disconnected from ourselves, we're disconnected from our identities, we're not seeing ourselves as we truly are, shame is going to arise to kind of signal this for us so we can get that need met. In addition to shame, something that we usually confuse with shame is guilt. Guilt and shame are not the same emotion. Guilt arises, think of like Jiminy Cricket in Pinocchio. Guilt is our conscience. Guilt is there, again, connected to meaning to show us that our values are all out of whack, right? That we need to realign our values. It's also there to signal for us when we are misaligned with our values or when we're taking on things that aren't really ours or we're prioritizing our values in a way that doesn't serve us. Guilt can arise from that. The next core emotion is anger. Anger is another really misunderstood emotion. A lot of people see people being aggressive or rough, and they think that that is an expression of anger. And really, that's an expression of not processing anger. So when we don't process our emotions, they kind of come out in all these not so great ways. And anger is one of those emotions that a lot of people suppress, and they'll suppress and suppress and suppress and eventually explode. Or they'll repress and repress and repress and become depressed because they don't want to look at anger and they don't want to work with anger. But the reality is anger is such a powerful emotion to take action to assert our boundaries. It's also a really powerful emotion to show us or signal for us when we are violating another person's boundaries. And this is really important to know because sometimes our ego tells us we're all in the right. And the reality is that other people have boundaries as well. And sometimes us trying to get our needs met in an effort to get our needs met subconsciously, we violate the boundaries of others. So it's important to work with our anger and understand that this is what it's signaling for us. Similarly to anger, a lot of people refer to it as frustration, but really it's disgust. Disgust is an emotion that nobody really talks about, but it's so common. It's the building blocks of things like outrage, which we see a lot in our society today. And disgust shows up when our expectations are misaligned with reality. Like I said, all of us have a basic need for sustenance and security. Part of security is certainty. Part of security is being grounded and really present in our realities, right? Not just our subjective interpretation of reality, but the objective, tangible facts of what's going on. So it's really important that we pay attention to disgust whenever we're judging something. It means we're not seeing the big picture. We're not really our perspective is really limited and narrow, and is preventing us from getting new information, growing in a way. So disgust is always really good to pay attention to. And when I work with my clients, they're amazed at how much they can grow, right? When they work with disgust, they can be open to more compassion and to a bigger point of view in the world. So disgust is another really great emotion. And then those are like the main uncomfortable, unpleasant emotions. So just recap, there's sadness, there's shame, there's guilt, there's anger, there's disgust, and then fear. Fear is another core emotion. All of us are built with fear, and all of us more or less are conditioned to fear or avoid fear, right? Fear kind of happens to us. Well, all our emotions kind of happen to us because they're involuntary and automatic. But we kind of feel like, okay, with fear, there's a lot of resistance to working with our fear. And that's completely understandable when you don't understand how amazing fear is. If you look at it from a neurological standpoint, which I don't usually, but in this case, it's good to understand. From a neurological standpoint, fear signals to our body to produce all this adrenaline and cortisol, and that energy goes to our limbs, right? Our arms and our legs. And they say that this is to either fight or run, fight, flight, right? Fear is when our trauma responses are activated. I like to refer to it as being emotionally activated, but it is really important to recognize when we're in this response. And there's many reasons why we naturally create these kind of responses. Fear is kind of that smoke detector. It's like, hey, in the past, we experienced something similar that was dangerous. And so we programmed ourselves to be aware of that and notice that out in the world. And fear kind of helps us with that. But a lot of times we want to get rid of fear, or we think that it's a useless emotion. And that's very far from the truth. That's like saying seatbelts are useless. They definitely have a purpose to keep us safe. We definitely want fear to bring things to our attention. But what we want to realize is that fear actually shows up when that need for security is threatened. That basic need for security is threatened, and we feel unsafe in some way. And a lot of people like to say a perceived threat isn't something to take seriously, but a perceived threat is a threat. Our mind can't tell the difference between real and fake. It can't tell the difference between something in front of us and something we're conjuring up with our thoughts. So we definitely want to honor our fear and take it seriously, but we want to realize that that fear is just a signal, and that it's there for us to be mindful and deliberate and intentional. So when we know how to work with fear, we know how to make good decisions, and we make good decisions by aligning with our values. So those are the 6 main kind of uncomfortable, well-known core emotions. We also have core emotions like love and joy. So love as a core emotion is about seeing the divinity and the goodness, like the pureness. When I say divinity, I just mean the pure soul of another person. Looking past the behavior, looking past the conditioning, and looking into the person's soul and knowing that at your core, you're good. At our core, we're all good. And love is when we see that in another person, when we have respect for that person, when we're truly connected to that essence of them, that's when we feel love. When it comes to our pleasurable emotions, love being one of them, it's really the times when we're in alignment, when all of our needs are met and we're really present and connected. That is when we experience our pleasurable emotions. So joy is another one. That's when our need for meaning is really rich. Like it's really, we're fully immersed in this moment, and we feel things like awe and wonder and joy and magic. And we have safety, and we have freedom and autonomy and pleasure, and all of it is aligned. That's when we experience our positive emotions. So I hope that you understand a little bit more about our core emotions, both uncomfortable and comfortable. I hope you can see that all of them are really important tools that we can use to empower ourselves and to make better decisions in our lives and to take care of ourselves. There's no good or bad. They're completely neutral, and they all serve a really positive purpose. So I hope that by understanding this, you can shift your perspective a bit more and try to embrace them when they show up.